this money laundering and this fake, because essentially all of this money, they're dealing with Rabobank. We know that a number of that, they're doing the same thing they did in 2018 with the cartel. And as opposed to 370 million, we're at 2 billion now. So it's escalated.
The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of Ironclad, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
Welcome to Borderland, NARCOSIS, an Ironclad original presented by First Form. You guys go check out your First Form supplements at firstform.com/Borderland. Don't forget to get the Cinnamon Toast Crunch. It is the best tasting one. My next guest is Jon Griggs, who has a history in law enforcement and personal security, who brought to us an investigation that he's involved in involving a cattle farm, a Ponzi scheme, and the cartel. It's a fascinating story, and it's an ongoing investigation, and I think you guys are going to love this one. Go check it out. Jon, thank you again for joining us on Borderland Narcosis. We've tried to do this interview before, but since that interview, and just so the audience is clear, a lot more information has come out. And so I think for us was best for us to re-record the interview and let's get down to it. And we're able to tell, I think, a more complete story here. If you don't mind, would you be able to first just introduce yourself and your partner, just a quick bio of your company, and then we'll get into some more deeper questions.
Sure thing. Thank you, Vince. Thanks for having us as well.
Absolutely.
So I began my career in law enforcement in 2006. I was a reserve police officer. There I started working armed security, went to a maximum security prison for 5 years. And then I moved to St. Louis and was a gang task force officer for them. Discovered a heroin ring with corrections officers. Ended up leaving that job, filing a suit, leaving that, moving back to Paducah, opening up my armed security business. And we had an F4, F5 tornado hit locally 20 minutes from here. So our quick response, there was a lot of looting going on. There were pharmacies that were being looted. Our quick response got us established in the community there in December of 2021. So people knew that, okay, if we call these guys, they're going to do a good job based on how they performed after this F5 tornado. I mean, it just totally destroyed this town. It was really tragic. So that's really kind of how we got established and just became this security force because there's no other business in our area that does anything like this.
Yeah. And then when was it that you got the initial call for this, I would say, this event that we're going to be discussing today?
Essentially 2 years to the date. Today. So the job officially started on April the 18th of 2023, and they had made contact the day before on April the 17th, 2023. The company, it was an armed security company in Austin, Texas, and they were hired by the United States trustee. And that is who hired us.
And what was the initial contract for? What were they asking you to do?
It was to watch over the assets on the farm, because there was a lot of heavy machinery, a lot of heavy equipment, and to keep people out, and to report to the trustee any inconsistencies that we saw, any people that were coming up, because there were several things that were going on at one time involving this fraud case. And their main concern was items of value walking off of these job sites and people getting information who should not be getting information, who were very involved. And that was our job, was to completely secure that scene.
What exactly was the original investigation about that they asked you to come support them?
That was Brian McLean involved in a money laundering, McLean Farms and Feed Yards involved in a money laundering and a Ponzi scheme. And at the time, they knew that there was a lot of investors that invested with McLean. He told them that he could. So there was two things going on. He was taking investments that he couldn't cover, and there was money laundering happening. So there were 2 points of this investigation that we had to get brought in for. And that was so that nothing from that crime scene walked away. They wanted everything secured.
And the other thing that, I read about it is John McClane. What happened to him?
Brian McClane committed suicide on April the 18th of 2023. And that was after he learned that his farm was being seized. He committed suicide around 9 a.m. and we were on the job at 11 a.m. that same day. So Mr. McClane took his life because he saw the forensic auditor and he saw several people converging on his farm. And the story is that the gig was up, so he took that exit and ended his life.
Yeah, sorry I said John McClane. I'm pretty sure that's the guy from Die Hard.
It is.
Right. Oh, sorry.
I want to say it all the time.
Yeah, but so you got the call to help investigate this, and then all of a sudden you hear that the main culprit for this case has now committed suicide. At what point did you and your partner start to feel like, man, this is kind of a crazy one?
Okay, from day one, it was from day one, because there was supposed to be 100,000 cattle, and there are going to be people in this audience who I'm sure are cattle farmers and that do have cattle that know that it should be 1 cow per 1 acre, and some people can get away with 2 cows per 1 acre. However, we know that there wasn't 100,000 acres out there. So from the jump, we immediately knew there's no combines. There's no, there was heavy equipment, but there was nothing to indicate a mass feeding operation for 100,000 cows. So I grew up on a farm until I was 13 years old. Both of my grandfathers were farmers. My mom's dad was in Guadalcanal, and he bought a farm. He came home from the war and bought a farm after that. So I grew up on a farm. I know what a farm looks like. And there was nothing that would give the indication that this was an operating farm. It gave the indication of people feeding a few horses and a few cows personally for themselves. And we immediately noticed that, because I was looking around like, where's the amount of hay? Where's the feed? Where are the tractors? Where's everything at? There's nothing here. What's going on?
Yeah. And so how does that happen? How does someone, their initial claim is 95,000, 100,000 cattle, but only 3,000 exist? I believe that was the number that you gave us. But how does someone pull off a scam of that magnitude without raising any alarms?
Well, that's a good question. And there were alarms raised. And that's why we're sitting here, because there were massive red flags that were completely looked over. And that came from the banking industry. So Brian McClane had presented to his banking apparatus that he owned these cattle. So he faked these cattle counts, and he gave the appearance. So he'd have 3,000 at a time. He would move those from one location to the other, and they're not going to go out there and count 100,000 cows. He knows that. So probably the max that you could count was around 3, and that's all the man ever had.
Jeez almighty, man. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. And what other things, when you guys went onto the scene, did you find that were suspicious?
Well, immediately, considering this was a suicide, and I'm not quite convinced of that, considering that this began as a suicide, what really got me was when we walked into his office, I noticed AR-15 magazines, I noticed pistol ammunition. So I immediately did a protective sweep. Seeing those things, seeing a suicide, and then you've got the other aspect of this, the investment scheme, where there's people that lost anywhere from $100,000 with McClane to $15 million, and they're showing up at this job site immediately when they learn that he committed suicide. So I did a protective sweep of his office, and that was, I was worried. I see ammunition stacked up, see AR mags. So I start going through things, and just to remove them, to secure them and remove them so they're not used on us. So during this protective sweep, I found 2 handguns. Now, allegedly, Mr. McClane committed suicide with a SIG P226. I'm sure there's audience members that are firearms enthusiasts, as I am. I know what a SIG 226 looks like. It's a good firearm. It's not a cheap firearm. During that protective sweep, I found 2 Saturday Night Specials. One of those was a Jennings 380, and another was a Raven 25 ACP. So nothing that any self-respecting gun owner would ever consider owning. That was alarming.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, let's get to this real quick. The other thing you found on here in our notes right here, it said that you found a discovery of some kind of medication. What is that medication?
That would be xylazine, and there was a lot of that. There was so much of it that we had to contact a vet, and they had to back a box truck up to load all this stuff. Xylazine is it's a equine muscle relaxer, and that's used in a drug called Trank to mix with heroin, and and fentanyl actually. So it really strengthens the you see these people like bent over, they're like this.
Yeah.
They look like a snake. They're walking around, and it's a horrible drug. And I mean, there was a ton of this stuff up there, a ton of it, and there were employees talking about it. And I said, we got to get this out of here now. And it took a whole box truck. They literally had to back up a box truck to get all that. So that was part of the scheme. It was part of okay, so they're moving and selling part of these drugs, and then they had a ton of antibiotics and stuff like that because they had to give the appearance of an operating farm of that magnitude. It's a lot of drugs.
When people started to find out, these investors, they started to find out that McLean, committed suicide, and they started to kind of show up. How much money were you starting to see was involved in this Ponzi scheme?
Well, that's a really good question, because at first we didn't know. So we're seeing people show up. A guy loses $100,000. Another guy comes, he's lost $10 million. So we know we're at 10.1 right now. And then we're getting phone calls. We're getting people that are coming up from Texas, and the forensic auditor. So we had a dual role also to assist and protect this forensic auditor that was brought in. And he was finding stuff left and right. And this is just from the jump. So in the first week, we're like, this is well over the $150 million, because they did a news article around April 23rd, something like that. And they said 150 million. So we're seeing a ton of people show up. This forensic auditor is talking to us and telling us about the magnitude that he's finding of money. We know that it is not matching that first news story of $150 million, because it's just adding up, just rocket ship.
After your investigations, how much money did you see go through this Ponzi scheme?
$2 billion.
In how long?
5 years.
$2 billion. $2 billion in 5 years.
In 5 years. Let me tell you the best performing month. And this matches exactly what the forensic auditor told me. In March, so this would be the last full month of Brian McLean's life, they did $228,932,748. That was in the month of March alone. Their next best performing month before that was December of 23, where they did 106 million. And in February, they did 189.
If they don't have the cattle that they say they have, how are they generating this kind of money?
They were making pay sheets, and they were sending those to the banks. They were sending so they would get a loan. And I'm sure that we're going to get into the banking and the banking apparatus of this, because that's very important for this story. So they inflate these cattle counts, and they take the 70 million was the last that they got on a loan from this Rabo bank. They take that 70 million, and there was check kiting going on. And I didn't even know what check kiting was until this operation and investigation. So they would make these pay sheets. They would get on the Dow for the day, find the price of cattle. So let's say that a fattened heifer cost $1,100 for X amount of meat, and they see that on the Dow ticker. They would create these pay sheets where it would, for $500,000, worth of cows. We moved, McLean Feed Yard moved and sold for the client 196 fattened heifers times like 1,100. So they would put that number down on these pay sheets. They would submit them to the banks, and there's these ghost checks running around, and they're getting paid off this. They're getting paid. So it was amazing to me, and we'll get into the discovery of the large cachet of those, I'm sure, in a little bit, but that's essentially how they did it. It was just paper. It's just paper going to the bank, and they're getting paid off. I mean, I still have a hard time wrapping my head around this, especially when you see the escalation. So when this fraud started in 2018, the first 2 months of this, we don't see anything going on. The first month, we see 146,000. The second month, we see 1,275,000. Then we go to 2 million, and then it just ramps up, goes into 13 million in 2019 for most of these months. By the end of 2019, they're doing 90 million a month, all the way until 2023, where you see these numbers of 106 million in January, February 189, March $289 million. I mean, this stuff added up very fast.
So this is a little confusing, but you're telling me that they pretty much had ghost cattle and ghost purchases and taking it to the bank and being paid off it. And that's kind of how it's been happening.
That's exactly what was happening. And I'm sure that there was something going on with the banks that we have yet to discover. And I would absolutely love to finish this investigation and find out the rest of that. We know that whenever there was some type of hang up where they would have to get a cash flow going, and that's where the investment scheme came in. That's where the investors came in. So McLean was telling people, well, I'll hold 200 cows for you that cost $1,100. I'll fatten them up. I'll take them to the market. I'll sell them for you. You'll get paid. So they used that money to put that into the banks. And then they would, when they got payment from the banks, they would pay that person back, and they give them a little bit more on top of that. So it would appear that they're covering all of those investments. Until towards the end, they didn't care. They just took average all of them.
So, right, the show is Borderland NARCOSIS. And I want to talk about, how does this connect to the cartel?
It's a term I just thought of yesterday. It's called narco banking. That's what I would like to call this, is narco banking. So, and there's a lot of stuff here. This is how it wraps in. So Rabobank, this is a subsidiary of Deutsche Bank, and they're in the Netherlands. Rabobank in 2018, there was a similar incident to this. They were fined $370 million. One of the American CEOs avoided prison time. Probably should have gotten it because we wouldn't be here right now, but did some research into that. And between 2012 and 2016, Rabobank at their Calexico location became one of their best performing banks in the whole country. And this is a major bank. We wonder why. Why would their bank on the Mexican border be their best performing bank in the country? Well, it's because they got busted laundering cartel money. I mean, that's not speculation. That's fact. In 2018, they were fined $370 million for cleaning cartel money. And that'll take you on a rabbit hole on its own. That started in 2008, and it went all the way until 2016, until they were finally issued that massive fine. And they're under investigation right now. We just found out a new one in the Netherlands as of April 2025 for essentially the same exact thing.
Their current investigation, is it for the McLean case?
I don't know. I have not been able to find anything outside of the country on that, other than what surface level that's online. However, I did identify a group called, it's an NGO. It's called SMX Collective. And this gentleman's brother was killed by the Sinaloa cartel, and he did a write-up, and he is an activist about, having some accountability for his brother's death, and he blames Rabobank, and he wrote a really good piece about this, and yes, yep.
All right, we're gonna have to get him on here to continue to talk about this. How does a bank? So the bank is here in America?
Yes, they've got their American branch, and they've got their main branch that is in the Netherlands. It's a big one. I mean, it's a subsidiary of Deutsche Bank, so it's huge.
Man. And so how is the cartel using that? How is the narco banking you talked about? How does this fall into the whole conversation?
Well, you've got to have clean money to buy things. We all know that. So Rabo was it was their largest cash performing bank in the country. So they're taking cash. They were saying that it was for rural farming. So they're taking this cash and they're putting it into the bank, and they're doctoring it up to make it look like, it's legitimate. Okay, so they had 400,000 in sales this month. They had 600,000 in sales this month. And rural farming on the border, it's cash. Nobody's questioning it.
What's going on, y'all? I'm not sure if you know this, but Borderland NARCOSIS is sponsored by First Form. First Form is a wellness supplement company. And, I've been with them for about 7 years. And I've been with them for that long because I truly believe in not just the product, but the people who own the company. They are a culture that just believes in your health. And so if you guys haven't tried it before, I would recommend you go and check out the Formula One Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Add a little bit of a ignition to that, and you'll have exactly what you need for your post-workout drink. This is something I've used for a very long time. When I'm in the best shape of my life, it's always been because I have a nice regimen of the First Form products. So if you guys are interested, go check them out at firstform.com/Borderland. Okay, use our link. It is the #1 stphorm.com/Borderland. And if you order over $75, you get free shipping. And if you're new to the site, you get a free app for 30 days. So go check it out. Again, thank you so much for all the support. See you soon. Is there some kind of I don't know, my wife used to be in banking. I don't know how it goes, but there's got to be certain identifiers that you have to kind of report even higher. Us in immigration, if you can't find someone with $10,000 cash on them, that has to be reported. And so I'm curious, how does a bank not go into reporting people that are showing up with $400,000, $600,000 worth, of cash? How is that not reported even higher? Is there a system that involves that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Suspicious activity reporting. You hit it on the head, $10,000. I mean, you and I, normal people, everyday people, that would be red flag city. That would be absolute red flag city. And this lawsuit that I sent you, it says in here that there were massive red flags, that the red flags were completely ignored. They used some language to where they knew the red flags would be coming, and they took measures to kind of keep those red flags from coming to the surface. But you've got a local bank that McLean was involved in, and that really helped perpetuate this scheme, this money laundering, and this fake. Because essentially all of this money, they're dealing with Rabobank. We know that a number of that, they're doing the same thing they did in 2018 with the cartel. And as opposed to 370 million, we're at 2 billion now. So it's escalated and it's out of control. Well,
it sounds like it's escalated in an area that no one thought it would be found. And all of a sudden, what was let's figure this out. What was the initial clue that someone identified there might be some money laundering, or there might be some corruption happening, or a Ponzi scheme happening? How did that officially or initially get identified?
Well, I can tell you exactly where we identified it at. It was during an inventory. So for the United States trustee, we're collecting major things of dollar value that are going to auction to be sold at an escrow to be distributed and given to the victims of McLean's fraud, the people that were actual victims, because there were people who knew good and well what was going on. And there were people that were legitimate victims, and that's very sad for them. It's very sad that they were taken advantage of. They put their trust in someone that they knew from their community. So my partner, Jeremy, during this inventory process, ran across a box of records, and it was placed in like a brand new sump pump box. And he identified that thing as, maybe being worth over $100. So we went to go pick it up and take it to where we're inventorying everything, and he would go on a trailer or whatever, but he picks it up and it's filled with paperwork. He's like, dude, check this out. So we start going through the paperwork, and it is hundreds and hundreds of these fake cattle feeding agreements with people and the banks. I mean, it was so much. It was so many fake cattle feeding agreements that we grabbed as many that we could. We ended up sending all this evidence to the U.S. government, but we copied as much as we could. And, I sent you a 15-day, just 15 days on an Excel spreadsheet, the fraud that we had found. We had to stop at 15 days because it was too much to add up. It was just insane. But in that box, they had the loan agreements. McLean killed himself. They didn't have time because we were there within an hour or two. So they didn't have time to destroy any of that evidence. They did the best they could. They threw it in that box. Jeremy runs across it, and here we are. And I shared a couple of those pages with you, and it was jaw dropping.
When you say they didn't have time to hide the evidence, who do you assume is they?
Okay, they, I would assume, are McLean's working associates and some of his living family members.
You think they were all involved?
That's who I associate. Yes, absolutely I do. And that's another thing I want to hit on because it bothered me. So not only did this place not give the appearance of a farm, the way that they treated their animals, it absolutely hurt me. And I've got a hard time trying to keep my emotions in check here. Have a hard time watching animals suffer that way. So we saw cows that were so emaciated, they were so malnourished because they weren't getting fed. They were props. They couldn't even stand up. We went and got bags of feed. My partner and I jumped on an ATV, opened up bags of feed, took them to these cows, opened them up, laid the feed in front of them, and they were so bad off that they couldn't even stand to go and eat. So we watched the family killing cows versus feeding them. So instead of doing what they said they were doing, running a legitimate cattle farm, they killed them. And they left them out there. They left their carcasses. On my blog post, I've got a picture of 2 cow carcasses on there. It's like one of the first things that I saw. So as opposed to feeding these cows, they killed them.
Yeah, we would love to have access to all those photos and videos and stuff as well. I believe we already put them onto a Dropbox for us, but just want to make sure we're able to show the audience some of the imagery and some of the situation. The story is just fascinating. There's so many layers to it. One question I have is there's got to be more corruption than just what McLean was doing. I mean, how are they able to say they have 100,000 cattle? Isn't there something in the cattle industry that kind of keeps tabs and checks on it? Is there some kind of system that can, this is correct or not? How does that work?
There is, but it was completely ignored. Everything was completely ignored. And I was told by a credible source that USDA may have identified this fraud 2 years before McLean committed suicide, and that they were afraid because of the cartel aspect of this. So 2 of the victims of McLean's fraud, they mentioned cartel activity directly to us, and this was pretty much in the beginning. So I believe that there were some people that were afraid, that knew exactly what was going on, and they were afraid. But so you had to have people at the banks, these loan officers and compliance officers, and this was I'll say, as the forensic auditor told me, that McLean was a piece of a very large puzzle. And what we've identified is it's just rampant narco banking where they know where the cash is coming from and they're signing off on it because they're fine with it.
And they're scared. It's kind of like, you know, in the cartel world, especially in Mexico, the plato y plomo, they say, silver or lead, you know, there's a good possibility that they've been terrorized to feel that same scenario could happen to them on our own soil. Now, there hasn't been much to prove that, but I imagine just your average person would feel that intimidation if they knew where this money was coming from. So you have a lot of people in this small town, if you will, that are either being intimidated or just turning a blind eye to the situation just so they don't involve themselves in something they don't want to be a part of.
Very solid point.
Where is this case at now?
This case is currently in the Northern District of Texas, where the trustee is working to identify more co-conspirators and more fraudulent activity. It's where we're at.
I don't understand why this hasn't been more national news. I called a few people before this interview and talked to a few friends of mine in the cattle space, and some of them heard of it, and they heard of it as the Ponzi scheme. They never heard the other layer of the cartel involved, money laundering. On top of that, there's a lot of like, oh, I've heard of that, but we don't people don't really talk about it. And why is it such a hush thing in the cattle space? Also to include, I didn't know this, but I was told that a majority of the cattle in America come from Canada and Mexico. And I didn't know that at first. And hearing that made me feel that, man, I didn't know that. It's another one of those, well, then it's almost obvious that there's a connection to the cartel, because I feel like almost every big business in Mexico has some kind of connection to the cartel, legitimate or illegitimate, whatever you want to say. But
absolutely,
how is this not bigger news? How is this not just, this should have been a Netflix special already?
Sure, absolutely. And we received information that a lot of these cattle could have been stolen from Mexico. But yeah, wow. we'd received information that's a good possibility. So you've also got the Mexican people that are suffering as well. I mean, when somebody can just roll up to a farm and steal their cows under the protection of narco banking and thugs. I mean, this is it's unreal. But yes, I can't wrap my head around why this isn't bigger. The only thing that I can think of is to protect. People don't like to put bankers in jail, and I don't know why.
Well, you've been involved in this case for 2 years. You've been heavy into the investigation of it. Is there any fear for your own life in talking about this subject?
Oh, there is. Yes, there is. Absolutely, there is. There have been a few incidents. I can get into them, but I don't really want to. But yes, there have been some incidents where I was afraid. What shook me up more than that was I'm more worried about what could happen to me locally, because we had the police. I mean, the police absolutely dropped the ball here too, if not were completely complicit, because, geez, this death investigation of Brian McLean, this will blow your mind. So my partner and I do have fear there, and we were shown. So let me circle back to two of the victims that we had identified. So after we left the job, we spent 60 days out there. That's when we both decided, no matter what it takes, we're obviously not getting paid for this. We're going to figure this thing out, and we're going to make sure that the people are held completely accountable for what they did. It's just shocking to me, but the local police, I worry about that. Yes, I worry about that. After seeing the death investigation and what should be in there and what's not in there, yeah, I have fear.
Can you talk more about the death investigation?
Sure. I've got it right here.
What were some red flags in that investigation that you're talking about?
Oh, geez. We got major red flags there. Major. Let me grab, because I made sure to note this. Okay. So one of the red flags that I identified is, in this report, it talks about the placement of a firearm on Brian McClain's body, that it ended up on his waistband, that he used a SIG 226, committed suicide, shot himself in the right side of his head, and the pistol was laying on his waistband. So the death investigation notes that Mr. McClain was wearing a Carhartt hooded sweatshirt and light-colored shoes. The investigating officer observed a cell phone on the ground near his right side, as well as a 9mm round. Doesn't say casing, it says round. Investigating officer observed blood on the front blue jeans and on the ground as well. IO observed male subject had shallow breathing at the time of arrival. So IO, investigating officer, took photos immediately. And then for safety concerns, moved the firearm to a safe location so that EMS personnel could tend to Mr. McClain's injuries. So in this report, it says that the Sig Sauer pistol laying on his person near his waistband with the slide lock back. So they make sure to mention blood on the pistol, blood on the jeans, no blood on the Carhartt hooded sweatshirt. Vince, you're going to have high velocity spatter. You're going to have blood mist. It's going to go everywhere. There's going to be blood all over the place. The pistol, now this is the really alarming part to me. In this death investigation, the firearm was owned by a friend of Mr. McClain. And there was a note that said, this gun belongs to XXX. They gave the firearm back to the owner the next day. So I went back and pulled suicides in that county within the last 2 years. There was a 45-year-old male subject who committed suicide with someone else's firearm. That gun was held for 60 days. 60 days, which is normal. That's normal policing. This absolutely deviated from any type of normal policing I've ever seen in my entire life. That you give the firearm back the next day. It's almost like they want it gone.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's
no gunshot residue. There was no GSR performed. And if McClain had shallow breathing at the time, you're a law enforcement officer. What's the first? You render aid.
Why did you get a chance to see the pictures? I imagine someone in a standing position who does that, the pistol doesn't necessarily fall right back onto their body, which makes it a little confusing to me. I'm curious. I'd have to see that, but it definitely sounds a little fishy.
Well, being the slight autist that I am, I've done so much research that I believe that that pistol was probably placed in his hand and the trigger was squeezed by somebody else.
Whew. And in the initial reporting, there was 2 other individuals. Can you explain who they were, who also had taken their own lives?
Yes, and I still am looking for their names. We were told there was an investment broker and there was an investor. The investment broker was from Oklahoma, and the other investor was from Texas. And this is in the mainstream reporting on this incident, some of the only reporting on it, that there were 2 other suicides involving this, and we have still never... it could be why I found 2 handguns in a desk drawer that shouldn't have been there. I don't know.
Man, this whole thing is insane. Why was it that you reached out originally and wanted to tell the Borderland audience this story?
Well, because you've got a really, really good pulse on the cartel and what's going on in our country. You got a really good pulse on the cartel and what's going on along the United States-Mexico border. There's nobody that I'm going to go to from any other news outlet that are going to have the resources and the knowledge that you do. So that's exactly why I reached out. And we've got some cartel arrests in our area that were red flags for me. You got Roberto Alderte, who was arrested in our area right whenever this fraud started up in 2018. And his brother Luis was arrested because he got a hold of an informant here in Paducah, Kentucky, to buy grenade launchers and rifles, because he said it's wartime down here in Mexico. So that was actually in 2020. Luis was arrested, and he is a lieutenant to El Mencho. And let me circle back on something I forgot. Three victims that we identified. So when our investigation started, we started running these people and calling them. We're like, all right, they probably had knowledge, mark them off. They were taken on a run. Let's talk to them. So 2 of these folks, they live here locally. We asked them if we could meet up. They wanted to see what we had. We wanted to see what they had. So it was like kind of our own little personal discovery. So we went and met with them. We showed them all of the cattle feeding agreements, all of this stuff that we had found. And they had something to show us. They showed us photographs of cows that were stacked up as far as you could see. So somebody took a front loader or some heavy equipment. We're talking thousands of dead cows that are stacked up. I mean, it looks like it's so far back. There are cows, so many cows stack up and so far back. You'd think it's a forest, but it's dead cows. And these 2 victims of this fraud were told, if you talk about this, you're going to end up in that stack. And we saw the photos. I mean, I was jaw dropped. And I've got some audio from another victim of the fraud who he had told us, yeah, there's cartel involvement, and they cut off hands. And then he would not talk about it anymore.
Jeez almighty. Was there any other interference within the forensic audit or anything else in the investigation that you were running into?
Geez, there was a lot. So to answer that, we found out that for Brian McClain to have an adequate and appropriate heads up, there was somebody in the justice system that had to have tipped him off. And we identified that as being a local prosecutor. I don't want to get in now exactly to say who that is, but that's the only person it could have been.
Was there any kind of proof of that for the phone records or anything else, or just by way of knowing that they knew? There is. And, you know, I know you didn't want to say it. I can cut it out if you want to, but, you know, you have been, and your team has been intimidated by some individuals at some point. You guys were shot at recently?
Yes, I was shot at recently. A couple Sundays ago. My mother was visiting me that day.
Do you believe it's all because of this investigation?
Well, I don't know anybody else I've pissed off to this level, so I would think so.
What would you like to see out of this investigation? What is the goal in your continuing to investigate such a dangerous, corrupt story?
Oh, well, the goal would, I want to see this. I want to see this all the way through. I want to see the end. My partner and I, we started this thing and we want to finish this thing. And there would be, you know, I'm not patting myself on the back here, but there would be no computers. There would be no mass amount of signed cattle agreements had we not come across those things, properly secured them, because Vince, no law enforcement came up there. There was the police didn't secure any of this stuff. Excuse me. No law enforcement agency secured anything. So what we want to see is an investigation, whether that has to happen publicly through a media outlet that we go through and do it that way. We want to finish investigating this. We want to go down to Texas because there's another aspect of this that went on in Texas with McClain's 2 other cattle feeding locations. So we would love to be afforded the opportunity to go down there and to investigate this like we investigated it here in Kentucky and figure the rest of this thing out, because I absolutely know in my heart of hearts that there is so much more going on here.
Whew. Man,
and it hurts the community. It hurts the people that live on the border. I mean, that's the other aspect that people don't see. This money paid for sex trafficking. This money paid for drugs. This money paid for, I mean, you know what cartel money pays for. So, and it normally involves pain and suffering. And we want to see that shit stop.
Yeah, man. $2 billion in 5 years is a serious amount of money. And that's a serious, it takes a serious system, right, in place to be able to pull this off for as long as they have, under the noses of the local law enforcement and everyone else. I find the story fascinating. Was there a cartel that they believe this is connected to? I didn't get to ask that question.
Well, we had heard the CJNG. That's what we had heard. That was what we were told, and I do believe that's probably true. But it seems that Rabobank doesn't discriminate against what. It seems that the cartels may even be at war with each other, but for the banks, I'm sure it's like the military industrial complex or the prison industrial complex or these other things that they benefit from war. They benefit from it. So I'm sure that we've got two cartels that the bank doesn't mind keeping their money safe.
Man, what lessons should investors and law enforcement take away from this?
Oh, do your due diligence. Go and physically see what you're investing in. Look for red flags. If you see anything at all, call it out. And invest in something that you know about. That whether it be crypto, anything like that. Invest in something that you have a surface level knowledge of and that you could see or physically touch, or about, basically.
Hey, man, I appreciate it, brother. Thank you so much for sharing this. We're going to do our best to push this out to the world, and hopefully it gets more eyes on this crazy subject. And any of you who are listening have any information on this or any kind of connection to it, or might be able to assist in their efforts in investigating this further, please reach out to us and we'll get you in contact directly with Jon. Jon, again, you and your team have done an incredible job, and thank you for bringing this to light. And I hope, like I said, I can only hope that, Borderland can give it the legs that it deserves to get more attention.
Thank you, Vince. It's been an absolute honor to be here.
Appreciate you, brother. Thank you for listening to Borderland, NARCOSIS, and Ironclad Original, presented by First Form. Don't forget to go check out your supplements, firstform.com/Borderland. And until next time, we'll see you.